The terror, which would not end for another 28 years, if it ever did end, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter swollen with rain. So here we are, with Stephen King's It. It's his 17th novel and 22nd book, but right now we are not counting the short story anthologies. And at this point you may be wondering why, if it is the 17th novel, it's just my 10th video. Well, simple. I have been skipping some books. The Stand, in order to put it when the uncut edition was published, and also I am going to be 100% honest with you here, to avoid talking about a huge pandemic with flu-like symptoms in 2021. I also skipped the 5 Richard Bachman novels, as I am still wondering where I am going to put them in this series. The Gunslinger, aka The Dark Tower 1, because we are going to finish this series of videos with The Dark Tower in a row, and I was a bit of a coward with respect of The Cycle of the Werewolf, as I know there is no way I could do anything even close to the master Bernie Greenstone in the art department. So yeah, Cycle of the Werewolf is on hold. So that's where 6 missing books are, and here we are with what is also Stephen King's second longest novel, with 1,138 pages as far as the first edition goes. No prizes given to whomever guesses which one is the longest novel, by the way. It is also quite hard to talk about because no matter what, we end up mixing it, the book, with it, the pronoun, and bear with me, I will try to make sense out of, well, it. It is probably one of the most influential novels King has ever written. Sure, the novels before this one have had immortal characters, and no one will ever forget names like Carrie, Christine, or Jack Torrance. But it was It, the novel that grabbed the killer clown stereotype, pumped it full of steroids, and dumped it from the sewers to terrify everyone. It was published in 1986 and, in 1990, adapted for the first time to the small screen in a 2-part miniseries that, thanks to the incredible performance of Tim Curry as the titular It, also known as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, is considered to be responsible for coulrophobia in a whole generation. And yes, the mini has aged badly in many aspects, most particularly the CGI, and we will not discuss that today, or this video will be as long as said mini. But Curry's Pennywise is still terrifying in key scenes, and many of the original kid cast went to do amazing stuff later, like for example Seth Green, while having some heavy hitters as the adults. 27 years later, and man, that is a number to remember, we got a remake, this time with Bill Skarsgård as the horrifying Not Clown, and again amazing child actors as the Loser Club and big stars in the adult side. But today, we are not going to gush over them. Instead, we're going back to basics and to the book itself. I'm AdalisaZ, and today, I want you to take my hand. We're going to go into the dark sewers under their remain, but it's okay. I think I know the way. We're going to see some dark stuff, but as long as we keep our fear under control, we'll be safe as we face Stephen King's It. The genesis of It came, funnily enough, from the 3 Billy Goats and the Bridge Troll fairy tale. One day, King got to think about it and how such a creature would act in the real world. At some point, the troll evolved into something far more sinister, and here we have It. By the way, I realize talking about It by its proper name is going to be next to impossible given the creature and the pronoun and the book. So from here on, we will be calling It, the creature, Pennywise, even when Pennywise is just one of the many faces that it takes. The book, however, will still be It, and the pronoun is still It, so bear with me and the future headache this will cause. In the years since the book's publication, 35 years when I am doing this video, the critical reaction to it has changed a lot. While constant readers pretty much loved it and it is considered the book that caused a rise in coulrophobia, which is, by the way, the fear of clowns, literary critics found it divisive. The length of the book has been the cause of King's fame as a doorstopper writer, even if, as I said before, only one other of his books reached the same page number and none of the others have come even close. And there's a certain scene at the very end of the book that has been blown out of proportion since the release of it, Chapter 1 in 2017, and has caused a lot of people to misrepresent what the book is about. And yes, we will talk about that just a little bit later, and not much because it's really not that important. And while the TV movie is now quite criticized due to the horrible effects, even for its time, as I said before, everyone agrees that Tim Curry's Pennywise is one of the most terrifying clowns in modern cinema. And later, whatever you think of it, Chapter 2, Bill Skarsgård managed to fill those clown shows. The story is both simple and complicated. And you know the drill, here there be spoilers. When the town of Derry is plagued by a sudden and strange disappearance of children and teenagers in 1958, the authorities decide that the best course of action is a curfew and hope kids are safe home. There are no clues, and no adult in town remembers seeing anything strange or out of the ordinary. However, the kids in Derry know that grown-ups tend to be blind to their troubles in town. 7 of them, Bill Denberg, Eddie Kasprak, Ben Hanscom, Richie Tozier, Beverly Marsh, Mike Hanlon, and Stanley Uris, collectively known as the Losers, as they are all constantly bullied for different reasons, know that the killer is nothing human. In fact, they all have encountered and survived the monster, a thing that lives under the town and that can change shapes to lure its victims and feed on their fear. The creature's preferred shape is a clown called Pennywise, but the actual creature has no name, and the children call it, well, it. In 1985, the killing spree starts again, and Mike Hanlon, the only loser who remained in town, decides to call his old friends to remind them of a promise they made as children. A promise none of them remember at the time of the call. In fact, they don't remember Mike until they hear his voice. But most of them still return to Derry to face their memories and their fears. However, this time they are adults, and their brains aren't as ready to accept what is going on. So, in the second round, it may come out triumphant. As it stalks each of them, the memories start coming back. Each step into Derry brings back memories of the summer of 1958, when they discovered what was killing their classmates, what blinded their parents, and their own inner strength. Little by little, they retake those same steps into a new confrontation with it, and the barriers of time start failing around them, as 1958 and 1985 merge into one final battle against the creature that has taken over Derry as its own personal hunting ground. Just like Pet Sematary before, it is a hard book to read and adapt. Because the subject matter, the thing hidden behind the clown face, the Goonies-like adventure of the kids to save their friends, and even the huge introduction to the cosmology of the whole Kingverse, for the lack of a better name, is one subject that no one wants to talk about. The consequences of different kinds of childhood abuse. Yes, good old Pennywise takes a lot of shapes to get its food, and all of them are the most incredible horrors that a child can imagine. The mummy, the werewolf, a leper, a vampire, the creature from the Black Lagoon, Frankenstein's monster, and, in a particularly gruesome episode that absolutely no one has the balls to adapt, flying blood-sucking leeches with wasp stingers. But when we're trying very hard not to think on how Pennywise would appear to us and eat our insides, we ignore a very telling common thread within most of Pennywise victims. They are all victims of domestic abuse, either physical, poor Eddie Cochran, whose abuse is painfully described in a chapter that, again, is never mentioned in the adaptations, or emotional. As much as the Danberg love their children, it is obvious that they left Georgie to be taken care of Bill but most of the time, and once Georgie died, Bill was sometimes barely a passing thought for them. It's a very subtle connection too. But just look at the losers themselves. As I point out, the Danburg love their kids. But Bill constantly feels invisible to his parents once Georgie is gone. He thinks in many chapters about how there is a cold feeling between them, and that he can't help but feel his parents sometimes blame him for Georgie's death. Unlike the chapter 2 movie that out of nowhere decides that Bill is as foul for faking being sick, a thing added for the movie, and that it was completely unnecessary. Both Ben and Eddie suffer from their mother obsessive and sometimes smothering love, each in a different way. While Ben is being fed to death, Eddie is convinced that a strong wind could kill him thanks to his mother's constant overbearing watch, which, thanks to a particular vicious chapter from her point of view, we know that it's in purpose. She really wants him to be completely dependent on her and thinking he is sick than him leaving her. Mike's first encounter with racism was his father telling him how much white people hate them for the color of their skin, even as the Hanlons are the closest thing to a loving family we have in the group. Because while both of his parents love him, Mike is the victim of a ton of micro and macro aggressions by the mostly white population of Derry, including a kid trying to convince him that the N-word was a good one and not a slur. Yes, there is a lot of use of that word in it, and I know that that can be very uncomfortable. Stan also suffers from discrimination that no one seems to care about, not even his friends, who are at least a bit more careful about Mike than about Stan's Jewishness. Richie's parents simply don't care to listen to him at all and will blame him for everything that goes wrong, to the point that you wonder if his constant need for attention is actually a cry for help, to at least be seen by his parents, even if it's to yell at him. And finally, Beverly is not only beat up by her father, but also there's a quite clear insinuation that her father is just waiting the right moment to molest her. In short, even without Pennywise to mess around with them, the losers had their plates full with their parents' actions. And just like in real life, survivors of abuse feel at the time of their abuse that there was absolutely no one to see them or care for what happened to them. All of the kids in Derry know that adults will not help. There is a general blindness to what happens that affects everyone, even the good adults like the cop that sometimes checked on the losers at the Barrens. Yes, the adults insist that they want to discover who is killing the children and will do everything right to stop the murders, like, for example, establish a curfew or ask the children not to be allowed. But when it comes to save the kids from Pennywise, to admit that Pennywise exists, even as a crazy hobo dressed as a clown, well, that's a step too far. To actually put a stop to the abuse that they witness when the kids come to the school with bruises and crying and with their hands broken, as in the case of Eddie Cochran's brother? Oh, no, that's not for them to decide. It's their family's business. Even at the end, when we get to the final confrontation, every single adult in Derry is just not there. Even Eddie's mom suddenly stops caring where Eddie is going because it's the time for the sacrifice. Because sometimes people just don't want to see the abuse. But children are far more resistant than what grown-ups give them credit for. So if they survive, they can put the horror behind. They can compromise with themselves about what they remember and what they don't, and that's where the invisible scars come. In the novel, the losers get hit with magical amnesia as soon as they leave Derry in their teenage years, but that's also true for many survivors. Well, not magical amnesia. But you put your trauma in a box and try very, very, very hard not to think about it, and yet it shows up in 1,000 different ways. It shows in Bill's horror books that replicate both Pennywise's modus operandi and his brother's death, even if he consciously only remembers that Georgie died, not that he was horribly murdered. On Ben's reclutants to form a family, but also his insistence on routines and always drinking at the same bar, even if he's working on the other side of the ocean. On Richie's chosen career, where his voices and jokes protect him from the dangers that he doesn't even realize exist. On Stan needs to have his life planned, perfectly ordered, without anything that could be called strange. On Eddie's wife, who is a younger version of his mother, who keeps enabling his hypochondria. On Mike's casual use of slurs to talk about himself, even in his own mind. And of course, on Beverly's choice of a husband who is every bit as abusive as her father was. They don't think they remember, but deep down they do. And until they face Pennywise and its horrors again, they can't escape the cycle. The novel works this perfectly. Because of the way the chapters are divided between the grown-ups in Derry and their memories in the same order as they remember them, we never know exactly what is happening before the main characters. As the plot unravels, the flashback becomes more frequent, and we can see how the cycle repeats. But it's not repetitive because we don't know the losers did this before until they remember, and the narrative is careful not to retreat what each group did. The actions start merging seamlessly, especially when we get to both trips to the sewers to confront it, to the point that even the chapters stop marking when was then and when it's now. Unfortunately, that is something that both adaptations decided not to try and emulate, which is, by the way, why both chapters 2, the miniseries and the movie from 2019, are weaker than the first chapter. By putting all the children's story in one go, by the time we get to the adult chapters, we already know what happened, how they faced Pennywise and the bullies, and how they got out of the sewers, promising to come back only if Pennywise did. So the actions of the adults when trying to remember what they did become incredibly repetitive. Even when the 2019 movie tried to make it a bit better by adding more flashbacks, it was too late. We already knew how the kids defeated it, and thus we could only wait for the adult losers to get on with the program. Which again is a pity, not only because it robs the story of its true climatic ending, that we get to read pretty much from Pennywise's perspective in the sense that somehow time stops having any meaning, which is how the creature lives, really, but also because it breaks the metaphor for trauma by putting each time frame in a neat little box. We can't understand the losers completely because we aren't in their shoes. I mean, how can we forgive Eddie for marrying a woman who is a copy of his mother and keep on thinking that every little thing in the world can cause cancer when we saw him stand up to his mother and realize that his asthma medicine is nothing more than a mint-flavored placebo? In the novel, we learn about this confrontation very late in the game, so we are used to hypochondriac Eddie and don't think weird that he reverted to his old ways. Not only that, we see that Eddie had to make a deal with the devil. His mother had run his friends out of the hospital where he was due to a broken arm, so he bargained. He'd kept on using his medicine and believing her insistence that he was frail, as long as she stopped trying to get between him and his friends. Which, of course, paints the whole relationship between Eddie and his wife in a very different light, as well as the relationship between Eddie and his mother. Same thing happens to Beverly, who also married a man every bit as abusive as her father, even if he was a bit more successful in life. She escaped her father, but never stopped believing that she deserved to be beaten, that someone had to worry for her because, well, she had done some bad choices, hadn't she? But again, we can't really see how those ideas formed in her head if we can see her be triumphant against Pennywise before we see her scared again of her own memories and her father. I mean, she doesn't even admit she hated her father until after she faces Pennywise as an adult in her old apartment, right when she finally admits that she also hates her husband. It is an amazing book. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Sure, it is long, and depending on your reading speed, it may take a while. And yes, there is that infamous scene in the sewers, so, well, proceed with caution. Just one thing, the scene is not very long, it only lasts 6 pages, and it is not really graphic. But there is a reason why, despite everything, it's still one of King's most known books and, outside of Randall Flagg, has one of King's most iconic villains ever, even if no one remembers the biggest one line of the whole book when talking about the plot, which I won't tell you right here because, come on, it's a big spoiler. And it's the one moment when you go, oh shit, this isn't over, is it? So yeah, read the book, read it, especially if you liked the 2017 movie but thought that the 2019 movie was weak. The change of pacing makes all the difference, and then you will get really why, in Derry, everyone floats. I want to thank my dear patrons, Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, and Jessic, as well as my first supporter, Tanya Pineda, and Amy Song, who is the best person in the universe and without whom these videos would not exist. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, with a link on description with my link tree, as I know my name can be hard to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else. If you can't support me this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, comments so that the algorithm catches engagement, and of course, you sharing the link. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. And I hope to see you here next time when we will take a slight tour on the road and see a different perspective to King's writing through the eyes of the dragon.